this particular mission, one of our values is we believe that the family, every member of the family, is part of the missionary team. Now that's different than some missions. Some missions, it's the father that's called, and the mother is not a part of that, or the children are not a part of it. In our particular mission, that is a strong value that each and every person in that family unit is called to be a part of the team. And so it doesn't work, Mom, for you to try to come in on Dad's call. It won't fly. You maybe will be able to handle it for a little while, but not very long. And we need to be able to see that the whole family is called. In Isaiah it says, I and the children that God has given me are for signs and wonders. And I want you to be encouraged that God has a call on you as a family. Now, we serve an absolutely just and kind God. And it's really important for you to understand that if God calls the father to go to Afghanistan, to serve on the other side of the world, the mother's got to have the call as well, and the children, and that God has everybody in mind. I remember when I had our first child, Karen, we were living in a village in Switzerland. I couldn't hardly speak enough French to order bread. My mother was on the other side of the ocean. We were almost all singles then. I was the only mom, and everybody was looking at me and how I was going to raise this kid, and I felt a little nervous anyway. You know, you always do with your first. Lauren's away on a trip. I have my baby in my arms, and I'm just being kind of silly, and I've got the baby, and I'm rocking back and forth. Your father's gone away, boo-hoo, 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 and I'm just acting silly like that. And boy, I got immediately convicted by the Lord. Is this how you want this kid to grow up? Her father's gone away, boo-hoo, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. Is that it? I want you to recognize, Darlene, it's privilege to be married to a man of God. And that I will never call her father away to her detriment. I am both kind and just. And I am committed to every single member in the family. It's a real important principle. I've heard people say, you got to have God first, the family second, and your ministry third. I don't really believe that. I believe it's God first, God second, and God third. And a just and kind God, when we seek him in detail and we walk in his will, the family's all going to be taken care of. All of them are going to be taken care of. The little kids and the big kids, because he doesn't love Lauren more than he loved Karen and David. He's just as committed to them as he is to Lauren. And so when we walk into the call of God, we've got to remember that God's called us together as a family, and he will always be just and always kind in all of his dealings with us. And we look and we hang on for the justice of God, and he will be absolutely just to you. During this period of time, I'm going to tell you probably a lot of stories. I got to tell them most about my kids because they're the ones that I know the best. They were not perfect children. I was not a perfect mother. They didn't have a perfect father, but we have a perfect Heavenly Father. And that's the point of reference, my friends. This word, I know you know this, but I always have to remind you. This is the manual for running our lives. It is the stories and the scriptures and the words of wisdom for every detail that we ever needed. It will tell us how to relate to each other. And during that time that I mentioned, as I was raising Karen, and I didn't know how to do it, I felt like I was reminded that this was the manual and that there probably was guidance about how to raise little kids there because God designed the family. And I begin to read and look for scriptures. I think I counted at my last count on my own personal concordance. I had about 65 scriptures about how to raise kids. Through the years, I made it a point to go back to those scriptures continually So many times it was through the wisdom of God's word that the wisdom that I needed at that time was there. So recognize that we have the best platform right here. Like most folks, I really like my kids. Committed them to the Lord from the time that I knew they were going to be. Dedicated them to the Lord. But we were also dedicated to a higher call. I was sharing with some ladies just the other day and said, God's convicted me about a whole lot of stuff during my lifetime. We won't get into that or we'd probably never get finished. But the one thing he's never convicted me about was neglecting my children for the ministry or neglecting the ministry for my children. Now that's because of his great grace, but also because he was so good to allow me to know what to do, when to make my schedule this way, how much ministry to be involved in. And we're going to talk about some of the practical aspects of raising our kids within that kind of setting, because we've never been called to neglect our families, but we've also been called to extend the kingdom of God. How does that all work together? How do we do it in a practical sense? So I'll give you what helps I have during this time, and we'll work together to see how we can extend the kingdom of God and that our family can truly be for signs and wonders. We want to do that, don't we? Talk about coming into a community setting in which people have prayed for that facility and that place. And some of you will have that experience of being pioneers. That's where I grew. The harder it is, really, I guess, in truth, the better I like it. And there is just no joy, at least from my way of thinking, like being the pioneer. See, you could walk onto the campus in Hawaii, and you could see these big buildings, and you could think, boy, isn't this great, and isn't this lovely, and so on. But you don't know what I know about those buildings. I know what it was like to march around that property when it was all weeds and holes and the rest, and stand on one of those places and say, I believe that this will be the future Go Center. I got to be there when we would pray all night. It wasn't always easy, but look for ways to get your children to participate in the big picture. In fact, the Go Center, which is like the conference center at the university, I stand in there and I lecture into the big room, and I look at the walls and I think, I've got a secret that you folks don't know anything about. I know what's behind that wallboard. Because I remember when we thought that building would never, ever get built. And we put out 2x4s, or you call them 4x2s. But we put out boards, timber, and nails, and stain. And we put it all in little bundles, and we put all these boards out. And I and the children that God has given me, we went out there and we bought some of those boards. And all the children wanted to buy boards. And so as parents, we'd help them buy the boards. And on those boards, they put their name. And on those boards, we wrote scriptures. I know it's painted over, but I know it's there right in the wall. The kids knew we had given everything we had. I heard them in the next room talking. And I wondered what they were doing, and I could hear this noise going on. So they came in looking quite serious. They had a towel. And David, who is usually the spokesman for the crowd, he came and he said, Mom, we knew that you guys gave everything you had for the hotel. And we decided that we wanted to give everything we have too. So here's everything from our piggy banks. I think it probably added up to about $12. Now, the kids had a goal, and that's what this money was being saved for, was to get new bikes. I shouldn't say new bikes, to get new bikes, but it would be their first bike. And if you remember the first bike you got, that was your first time for a little bit of independence, and that's a really big purchase. We've already looked in the Sears catalog. We know they cost $49, and you have to pay tax and all that kind of stuff. So there went the bikes. The kids were excited to be a part of this because they were living through all of this with us and the joy of God's provision, and they didn't want to get left out. Probably was 3 days later, some people came through to visit me from where I had been as a high school student. I had worked for these people while I went to high school. I had cleaned house for them and become friends with them. They were visiting in Hawaii, and they came to visit us. When they left 2 little coin purses for the kids underneath their pillows. Well, you know the rest of the story. They opened up those coin purses, and in them, each was a $50 bill. Of course, when Grandpa heard this story, he sent the additional money to pay the tithe and the tax. And they got their new bikes. But they also got to help purchase a hotel. Don't leave your children out. Give them the joy of participation in whatever it is that we have. There was a season after we got into this hotel when you'd think after we went through all of that to get it, that through a series of events too complicated to go into right now, we almost lost the hotel. We were about to be foreclosed on. The children at this time were in a King's Kids boot camp. They were getting ready to go to an outreach in Tortosa, Spain, and they were meeting during this time. And God used the children to lead us through one of the greatest moves of God I have ever been in, and I've had the privilege of being in quite a few. We had about a week before the July 15th when we would be foreclosed on. The children would wait in prayer, and as adults in leadership, we would be waiting in prayer. And the King's Kids leader, Dale Kaufman, would come down and say, the kids are feeling such and such. They feel like we should have a give-a-thon. We should give away everything that we can. We'd already given all the money we had. We didn't have anything else to give. And so we set up a table, and people put down things on this table, and then you could come and get it. And if there was something there that you needed, then you would give it. You would take that, and then you would put something down. And there was such a feeling of generosity around us. Now, you know when it's a real move of God, when little kids come to your door and say, do you have any trash I could take out? And they don't ask for money for it. Can we help you wash dishes? Because after we'd given all the finances we'd had, after we had laid out anything extra that we had, then we felt like the Lord challenged us to keep on giving. And then we started giving more services to one another. And the children led us in this move. We felt like it was to be a time, there was great spiritual warfare. But when we finished the season of spiritual warfare, we felt like there was to be a time of worshiping. And instead of having a 24-hour prayer chain, we were having a 24-hour worship chain. And I can remember going up there about midnight, which was my hour from maybe midnight till 1. And a 6-year-old was there with her dad. And she was the one that was prophesying in the tent. I remember clearly how God spoke through this child, and they led us during that time. The night before, we're to lose the facilities. We have not seen anything happen. But we wrote out this big document, and we wrote on this that we'd had this great cloud of witnesses because the night before we had started maybe at 7 o'clock at night and went till 12 midnight, in which we talked about how God had provided this hotel for us. And we marked down all of this and said, when God said we needed to paint, he brought in paint. When we needed food, he gave us fish. When we needed this, he did that, and he did that. And then we all signed this document and said, well, there's no logical or intelligent reason to believe God's changed now. If he gives us the property, fine. If this has been the season, fine. It's okay with us. And we planned a big party for the night of July 15th because no matter what, we know our God would have provided. But on July 14th, again, led by the children, they felt like we were to sleep outside. And so we did. We slept outside that night, and we all made big posters like, God is faithful, God is just, God will provide. And we went out there, and we put all our bedrolls out, and we stuck our stake in the ground that said, God is faithful. And we said to the Lord, if you take this whole facility, which we had prayed for and seen God do the miraculous for, it doesn't matter. What matters is the ministry is going on. The ministry of Youth with a Mission of the university in Kona, Hawaii will go on, facility or no facility. The ministry is not limited to this building. And this is the building, friend, we had the word of the Lord for and miracles. But we slept on the ground. I will never forget that night. It was a great big moon, so bright and beautiful. And people worshiping all night up there in the tent. And so you would hear the music of the songs being sang. And I walked around and I'd see these little families, with the covers underneath their chins. Their stake in the ground. God is faithful. And then we got up at 5 o'clock that morning, blew the trumpets for everybody to come. Police came too because we disturbed the neighbors. And then we marched around that property, be a couple hundred of us. We marched around that property and we stood in the site of the future School of Early Childhood Education. And we believed for God to provide the Ghost Center that I've just described to you. We believed God for all of these things, and we stood in those places and we said, God, we believe you for these. Phone call came. Financial area turned around, and our place was saved. But besides that, we were given on that same time another facility. Some of you are familiar with the Makapala property. A wonderful, another facility, turnkey, able to have many schools on another part of the island. God is faithful. God is faithful. And now these same children that lived with us through all of those kinds of things, many of them are believing God to take over Media Land. Many of them are believing God to do big things in the diplomatic corps someplace. Many of them are believing God to get them into a hidden people group. Why wouldn't God fulfill a great big vision? It's all they've ever known. And sure, there's times when you eat fish and eat lentils. But who has such a glorious adventure? If it's an adventure for you, friends, in the ways of God, it will be an adventure for your children. And we serve a remarkable God. And so this wonderful community that God's called us to, this belongs to us. We lived in that hotel for most of my kids' growing up years. Our children never had their own bedrooms until they were 17 and 19 years of age. We had these 3 rooms that I was pleased to be there for the rest of our lives. It didn't matter. I really thought it was a very nice place. We'd fixed it up cute. We enjoyed it. And then to our astonishment, that God begins to provide for us. Some of you are aware, on our 25th year of the mission, offerings and gifts were taken for us to have a house. And we have the most gorgeous house you could ever want. And we're heading out to live where we don't even know where we're going to live. We're ready to go for another adventure. We've rent the house out. Someday we'll return to it. But this facility in Hawaii is precious to me because I've seen the faithfulness of God. Also, we've helped work on that facility. Our whole family has worked on that facility. We've painted, we've pulled weeds. And we have a different kind of lifestyle when maybe you live in just 2 rooms or 3 rooms, but who keeps up the corporate? Do I only get the benefits? Do my children learn that we don't have to worry about washing dishes because other people wash dishes? We don't have to learn about doing food prep because we've got other YWAMers that do that, and we just stand in line and we get blessed. We have other people that do all of these kinds of things. There is not enough work for a child to learn how to work in 2 rooms. And besides that, they need to give input into the corporate. And our children have the most wonderful work resumes because they have done all kinds of jobs. And so we would have, for a long time, we had to have, because this place was so overgrown and so much extra work, for a long, long time, friends, we worked every single Saturday pulling weeds and doing all of that. And I always liked to get the kids. So I'd get the kids and I'd run the kids' crew. But it was our facility. And not every day do you get thrilled about pulling weeds, believe me. But that's sort of beside the point. It's ours. And our children need to be involved in the corporate. Now, I've been real surprised at parents. A lot of parents don't seem to feel like their kids need to work. To me, that's part of life. And when we read those scriptures, we see in the Proverbs that I said to you the other day that we're not to have lazy children. There's a lot in the Word about how to work. I'll give you a Bible study on it. And so our children need to participate. And that also gives them a great, great respect for those that do that kind of work. If you get the garbage detail and you have to pick up the litter, you know how much work it is. You don't litter. And so figure out ways for your children. Now, we were just so blessed by people that wanted to help our kids be good workers. And they got to do so many jobs. And we looked early in their lives. I was always trying to see what kind of gifts did they have in them. And it was so obvious Karen was going to be a preschool teacher. She'd rather play with little kids and teach them and read to them than be out with her peers. She always liked little kids. So I went to the preschool leader, the teacher over the whole preschool. It was summertime. Kids aren't in school. And Karen was 9 years old. I said, would it be possible? Karen needs a summer job, just for an hour or 2. Would it be possible for her to come in and do something in the preschool? Could she help? Well, of course, the preschool teacher's thrilled to have this little extra helper. And what's happening, Karen's finding out, yeah, she really is called to be a preschool teacher. And I tried to think in terms of, as the children got older, before they were old enough to get outside jobs, what kind of work experience would be beneficial to them? I think it was the summer that David was 10 years old. Maybe a little older, maybe 12. And we asked him to be the runner from one office to another. Sounds very important, doesn't it? And so he would go and he would pick up mail and he would be the in-service mail director, you know. He would take all of these things from one place to another. And because the campus was big, sometimes people had to have letters posted and that, he could take his bike and do that. So it was a pretty good job. Not too many hours. But going to people and asking other people to supervise your child, because they like to work for somebody else and it likes to feel like a real job. And all the time they're learning. Our kids learn to be receptionists, learn to work. David got the thrill of his life. I have to throw this part of the story in while he's a runner. There was this old, dirty man. I mean, really dirty. Kept coming by the international office to see Lauren. I always tried to be gracious to him, and each time Lauren was not there. Finally, I said to him, is there any chance that you would see me? He looks all around. He says, well, yes, if it could be by ourselves. So I said, okay, we'll come in here and we'll close the door. So he sits down across from my desk, has this briefcase that's half falling apart. And he said, I felt like God wanted me to do something, and I wanted to give it to Lauren because I know he knows where the biggest needs are in the world. And I know he knows the people that need Bibles. And I want to help do that. And he starts bringing out $100 bills and lays them on the desk until we have $10,000 in $100 bills. And do you know what I'm thinking the whole time? Oh, I shouldn't be in here. My name is Cunningham, and I'm with all this money. There's nobody else. I was so nervous because we've always been so careful about that kind of thing. So I said to him, write a receipt, and you tell me how much money there is. And this man had such a burden for all of this. And so it gathered all the money up. And of course, our runner has to take these things from one place to another. So David came in, and I had this money, of course, all wrapped up in bills and in packets and all. I said, David, look at how much money there is here. I told him the story. And I said, now, you have to walk with this money over to the accounting office, which would be like from here to the back of this stage, back of the building. And I said, do you think you can handle this? I said, and I called the accountant, and I said, now David's coming through the door, and he has a very important package for you. And I said, he'll need to have you sign for it so that we know it really gets there. So David got us all in his backpack and looks to the right and the left. I'm watching out the window, and the accountant's watching out the window. And the runner really had a job. Later, I saw him letting the kids touch his backpack. It is a grand adventure, friends.